Hey everybody. So welcome to my live stream this week. So hopefully everybody's having a good week and being safe. So thanks again for everybody for joining. Again, I'll keep stressing, please ask questions and please feel free to ask me whatever you want about game design, art production, whatever, game development, any of those areas. Here to answer all the questions I can. And it definitely does help me and make my life a little easier when you guys ask questions, because me rambling on and preaching at you for 2 hours is pretty hard work. So definitely love answering your questions. So don't be shy. Cool there. So glad to see you're going to take the game design course in 2D animation, 3D modeling. Man, you're going to have a full and busy life. So happy that you're joining, and looking forward to mentoring you this I guess coming up month, and should be pretty exciting. So we got a lot of fun stuff ahead of us. So thanks for joining us this week, and let's dive in a little bit. So this week I'm going to kind of crash course you guys a little bit. So I'll apologize if it's a little bit mixed, and then I'm going to be putting a bunch of things together this week. I'm kind of a little bit recycling some old presentations from some previous classes. So if you guys are an existing student or soon to be student, you might recognize a few of the presentations. But I'm actually trying hard to also kind of take a different slant on it. And I know that a lot of you that are here today are artists. CG Spectrum obviously has a massive following and user base and student base that are artists and not necessarily game designers. And so today I'm going to be talking a lot about how do artists and designers kind of work together. And so it's going to be, a lot of information about how do ideas come about, and how does form and function work together, right? So the form is the art, and you guys as artists, whether you're a concept artist, whether you're a 3D modeler, whatever you are as an artist, there's the how do we make it look pretty? How do we make it look cool? And then as a designer, as a game designer, there's the how do we make it fun? So that's the function, right? So form versus function. And that takes place kind of, quite often at the conceptual level, everywhere from the characters to the world and kind of just everything else that goes into making a game, and kind of where do you start and how do you start, and trying to understand all that process. And there's no right or wrong answers here, but I just kind of want to give you guys some stories and talk about how it can be done or it might be done, and kind of best practices for how artists and designers can work together to make hopefully a much better game. But this would also be totally 100% applicable if you're into movies, animation, and anything that's not even games. This same exact problem exists. And this problem is about, how do you make something look really great, but also serve the purpose that it needs to serve, whether that's in gameplay, whether that's in story, or whatever, right? And so that's that challenge of meeting kind of both criteria. And so so let's talk a little bit about that and try to see how you guys can both as either artists or designers, or even if you're an artistic designer and you can do both, how you can make better stuff, right? And applicable to all things. So before I jump in, let me see, Dennis here has got a couple questions. Welcome, Dennis, and thanks for joining. So it says, I'm an animator, but in general, like other fields, so you finished the advanced animation course? Great. Yeah, Mark's awesome. Yeah, he's quite the character, so thanks for putting up with Mark. We love him to death, but he's definitely fun. Yeah, so basically, why don't the students work together as in modelers and the scenes, animators? Yeah, so Dennis, to answer your question, that is definitely something that's very high on our list, and is something that we are beginning to work on. what we've found, what's been really hard, kind of like in real world, if somebody's not there driving it, if somebody's not there pushing it, trying to get people to work together can be really hard. And the problem is we have all these different students at all different levels. And so some of them can work together. But what we found is if the students themselves don't motivate themselves and try to do it together as students, if it's just us coming in, it hasn't worked. And just people kind of like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And then nobody ever does it. And so I'm totally up for, if you've got any ideas, Dennis, on like maybe ideas of how to get students to work better together, I'd love to hear it. Or from any of you guys, it's just been a challenge again for us. We can't mandate it. We can encourage it. And I definitely want, artists and designers and engineers and just all of the programs, even if you're a concept artist and you're trying to do concept work and you're a 3D modeler and you want somebody to, concept something that you can model, I would love for the students to work together in more production environment. And I know that Jeremy, our COO, is actively working on some ideas, and we are working on some ideas on how to get students to work together. But again, in our experience, when people haven't been, when they're kind of being forced to do it, they haven't been as successful with it. And so, we are working on some ideas, but I definitely would love to get people's input if they do it both here, or feel free to ping me on Slack or email me, as well. And always happy to have those types of conversations because it is something I'm excited about. So Drawn Skull, when you take up the game design courses, is it necessary to take up game programming? Absolutely not. So as a game designer, and this is a bigger topic that we're not going to get into today. And again, I'm happy to have this conversation offline, but this diverts from the art and game design topic for today. But in general, as a game designer, you need to be aware of programming. You need to be aware of art, but you absolutely do not have to have any skills in art or in programming to be a great game designer. It helps tremendously to have both art and programming skills. And so it definitely would not hurt for you to go and be very, very, very well-rounded. But the job and the learning for being a game designer is already pretty massive. It's already very, very, very big. And so the risk is, and I've seen this over and over with many schools, is when you try to be a great game designer and you try to be a great artist and you try to be a great engineer or programmer, you will fail. And you basically become kind of a super generalist, jack of all trades. And you might be capable of doing some indie stuff and doing some small things, but you're going to really have a hard time working in a AAA studio if you try to be everything. And so if you already come in with some programming knowledge or some art knowledge or things like that, great. If you want to, be a great game designer and tack on some art, amazing, but don't feel like you have to have programming knowledge to be a great game designer. But be expected that you're going to be learning some programming while you learn your game design, because you do need to have at least a little bit of technical skills when it comes to especially being able to work with Python or Lua, visual scripting, Unreal Script, things like that. So the technical skill does not need to be programming, meaning like C, C++, that kind of stuff. But as a designer, you at a minimum need to at least know how to do C#, Lua, Python, Unreal Script, things like that, both in either text scripting or visual scripting. But maybe in the weeks to come, I'll try to cover that in a little bit more depth. But again, happy to talk about that offline. So Dennis, let's say artists, there might come a time, even though you specialize in one field, yet some studios want you to do modeling or rigging, if you will. I very, very rarely, again, if you're at a small indie studio, you might find people that, are doing everything from concept art to modeling, to rigging, to animation. So the smaller the team is, the more, generalized you're going to be. The larger the team is, the more specialized you're going to be. And so, that's where you have to kind of figure out what you want to be. kind of when you grow up. And again, knowledge is power. I really strongly believe in that. I consider myself a polymath, which is somebody who studies a wide range of topics. And so I study all sorts of stuff from psychology to biology, chemistry, other areas that aren't even game development related, because I find that they have application into what I do. And so knowing more things is never bad, and being able to have skills in more and more and more areas is great. But make sure first and foremost you're an expert in something, and then tack on and learn some additional skills, to do that. And so trying to do that first, definitely is important. Let's see. So Dennis, my question is, would you suggest artist students to get into the industry, even though you won't work in the field you've not specialized? For example, having an interesting offer from. It's hard. I mean, Dennis, the reality is a lot of times you may just take a job because you need it, and that's okay. And you may work in an area that you may not want to, but sometimes you're forced to. Sometimes what you need to do either to make money or just to get ahead. And it doesn't matter how experienced you are. As a quick example, one of my buddies is a guy named Citron. He's a Vietnamese guy. He started in traditional cell animation in Vietnam in the 60s. And he was animating before I was even born. I mean, and the guy is absolutely mind-blowingly phenomenal. I won't get into his whole resume, but needless to say, he was at ILM as the lead animator, and on all the Star Wars movies, the episodes 1, 2, and 3. He was the guy that did Jar Jar Binks. He won't admit it, but he was this phenomenal character animator, right? I mean, the best I've ever seen, the best I've ever worked with, and yet his job now, I remember talking to him when he worked on a movie called Perfect Storm, and and he was the Wave Crest Foam supervisor on Perfect Storm, and yet here was this guy with 30 plus years experience in character animation, the best of the best in character animation. Yet the need for character animation started to decline at that period in time, especially at ILM. And so now here he was doing effects animations, and he wasn't really happy about it, but that's what he had to do, right? And so so that's that challenge sometimes, that we get thrown into things that we don't always want. Yeah, so you just have to, you just have to keep trying. Again, sometimes we all take on projects, we all take on jobs, we all take on roles sometimes that we don't want. And sometimes we just have to suck it up. And sometimes we just have to do that for a while and then find our way back to what we truly want to do. And whether that way back is just, going off and getting some extra training, or just being patient, or switching jobs, or whatever that is to get us into that role that we're happy about. That's that's just part of life. And I've been very fortunate. I've got to work on some great projects. But there's definitely been times where I've been thrown on projects and doing things that didn't exactly excite me, right? And it wasn't my fault. It wasn't bad skills. It wasn't that I needed to learn anything. It was just the company needed me to do something. An example of this was I worked on this game called TNA Wrestling. And TNA Wrestling was a total nonstop action wrestling. It's actually still to this day, it's a TV show that's on kind of like the WWE, WrestleMania kind of stuff. And I could care less about wrestling. I know nothing about it. I didn't want to know anything about it, but the company, decided that our team was going to do this wrestling game when I was at Midway. And so, I sucked it up for 2 years, and I learned everything about wrestling, and I watched every wrestling show and talked to all the guys and everything else. It was painful. But you just had to do it, right? And that was my job, right? And so we have to be professionals. So it just kind of depends. So just keep at it, keep fighting, and you'll find a way to get to where you want to be, right? But if you just do your 9-to-5 job and that's all you're going to do, it may be trouble. So hi there, is it Jocko, I guess? Welcome, thanks for joining. I don't know, Dennis. I'm involved in the game design stuff, and right now we're not focused on any of the 3D stuff at all. I'm happy to put you in touch with Jeremy and the guys to know if they're going to do any Blender or anything like that. We don't have any plans in game design and the game department to teach Blender. It's a tool, and I understand a lot of people are using it, but we're more focused on moving forward and teaching probably Unreal, Unity, game design and things like that. And I'm not sure if the modeling department and stuff is going to get into teaching additional tools. But again, if you have trouble finding out, definitely ping me, or if you know Jeremy, ping Jeremy, and he can definitely help you out and let you know if there's any plans for that. All right, guys, let's switch paces here. Please keep asking questions, but I want to make sure that we also kind of move forward with today's talk a little bit. Again, welcome everybody, and if you're just now joining us, we're going to kind of get into to everything right now. So today's topic again is going to be about art and design and kind of form and function and how these things work together. And so I apologize, I'm going to be recycling a couple classes. And so this will give you guys a sneak peek if you haven't taken our course and are kind of curious about it. But I'm going to kind of skip through these things. I'm not going to give these verbatim. A typical 1 week game design class is about 4 or 5 hours long. And so this particular class on visual design is typically about a 4 or 5 hour class. And I also want to go through some world building and talk about some other stuff. So obviously I can't cover 10 hours of material in an hour and a half or so. So I'm going to kind of skip through this and try to just talk through some of these highlights. And try to get you guys to sort of, understand and see what's exciting, about being an artist and being a designer, and kind of how you guys, can work together. And so, so first of all, I'm going to talk about this idea of visual design. And so visual design is kind of this idea that, again, one of the challenges in being, a game designer, game developer, let's say, whether you're an artist, a game designer, or whatever job role you're in, is that the worlds themselves, somebody has to create the worlds. Somebody has to create this thing that everybody's going to see, that they're going to play, that they're going to experience. And again, this is the same generalized problem if you're making a movie, right? I don't care. I mean, a game is harder because you have to play through a character, and you need it to be fun, or you need it to be exciting, you need it to be, maybe really strong or really powerful, or have a ranged weapon, or whatever that is. So in a game, that does matter a lot. But that's not really too different than, say, even if you're making movies, right? And you're doing visual effects or whatever. It's this weird thing of like, okay, whose job is it to really break down and understand like what needs to be created? So whether you're writing a movie script or whether you're writing a game script, it's that same sort of problem in that, for example, do you need like a really big, strong character here? Do you need somebody who's really fast? Do you need somebody, who has a special ability? Does this character need a lightsaber? Is this character good or bad? There's a million things that go into like a character, and there's a million things that go into a world, and those things can really affect the stories, and therefore the gameplay, and therefore the visual environment, storytelling, and kind of like all this stuff is, needs to be sort of understood. But it's a chicken or the egg problem, right? The chicken or the egg problem is, do you start with a visual? Do you start with a story? Do you start, from a creative director position? And for those of you that haven't seen my class a few weeks ago on how to be a creative director, I did give a Twitch stream, I think 3 weeks ago, on the job and the role of being a creative director. So if this particular topic interests you and you haven't, and you're not quite sure what a creative director does, I highly recommend to go back and watch the saved version of that, because that definitely will give you some additional insight into kind of this role of creative director. But regardless, there's only so much, whether you're a movie director or a games creative director. It's basically the same thing of like who's ultimately responsible, right? Who comes up with the idea? Who's that idea guy, right? Does the idea start with what this thing needs to do to play the role it needs to play in that story, in that game, in that movie? Or is this, thing just going to start with something that looks really cool? And then, from a design perspective, do I then take that thing that looks really cool and write a character around that, right? And so it's that kind of like that, again, that chicken or the egg, cart before the horse kind of problem. Do you start with something from a design perspective, or do you start with something from an art perspective? And the easy answer is you can do both. And there's not a right or wrong answer. And quite often, my personal approach is in doing rapid iteration and in doing stuff that where you're rapidly iterating on things and going back and forth as a team, right? And so the artist may come up with say an initial idea and have something for a really cool character, and the game designer may look at that and that might inspire him, and the game designer goes like, oh wait, okay, well if I had that character and then maybe I give him a sword, and then and it evolves, right? And so then the artist goes like, oh no, like that's gonna look really bad if I give him a sword in his hands, like that doesn't like function. But maybe if I give him a spear and then he does this, and and he can spin with the spear, and he has that, and you can kind of riff off of each other and you can build off of each other, and it's this back and forth process. But it gets tricky because there's artists, there's animators, there's game designers, there's creative directors, there's writers, and there's all these different people involved. And then you might have, established franchises. You might have certain things that, for example, if you're going to do, Lord of the Rings, or if you're just going to do, say, something that's fantasy generic, and not even Lord of the Rings franchise, but then you might know like, oh, I need dragons. Oh, I need elves. Oh, I need this or that. So you may have places to start. You may have a guideline for what these things are. And therefore, maybe more of it falls upon the artist to design those things visually, because you might already sort of know what some of these things are. But some stuff might just be a new and original world. And, and what are those things? And, but even if it's modern day military or something, you may have things where you're doing stuff where the, you've got a bunch of military, like special forces guys, like in my game, Rainbow Six Vegas. You might have a bunch of military special forces guys that are running around, but I still need to know like what kinds of weapons are they going to use, and they might be swappable. So there may be multiple weapons. What kinds of uniforms are they going to wear? What kind of body armor are they wearing? Do they have helmets? And like, do they have shields? Do they have, whatever? And so I'm constantly having to think about those things, because those things affect the gameplay a lot. And so while, an artist may not necessarily have to concept all of that, but at some point they really do, have to understand, again, what needs to be designed. Everything has to be a conscious choice, in a game. Oh, yeah. Thank you for your service, Dennis. That's great. So that's the problem and the risk, right? When you have all these different components, and it's kind of like, which one should come first? Which one is most important, or which one is, do you have to kind of think about first, right? And that's where it gets to be a challenge. And so let's talk about kind of visual design sort of in general. I'm gonna kind of again move pretty fast here and talk about just kind of what these roles are. And, as a level designer, and we're going to start with levels, and this is the worlds and the environments, right? And so how do those matter? And so as a level designer, you're this person who's putting together the worlds, but it's a interesting catch-22, because again, the worlds affect the gameplay a lot. Like, what type of world is it? Is it, is it a sandy world? Is it a snowy world? Is it modern day? Is it fantasy? Is it science fiction? Is it indoors, outdoors? I mean, there's so many like variables there, right? And the level designer can't be like necessarily doing that 100% on their own. They have to really kind of be able to figure out like, okay, how is that going to affect the story, or how is that going to affect something? Like even take the movie Star Wars, and and it starts on the planet Tatooine, and it's got a desert planet. And yes, I mean you could have started Star Wars on Hoth or some other kind of planet, and it may not have mattered. But again, somebody had to make that decision. Somebody had to design these things, and then there was this at some point a nucleus of an idea that said, well, we're going to start on a desert planet, right? And then somebody said, well, we want these sand people, right? And the sand people made sense in the desert, and they rode the banthas, and so that fit with the desert, right? So now the character designs are being driven by the visual decision, and the story decision to put this on a desert planet, right? And then you've got like the Jawas and their big sand crawlers, and those things made sense in a desert world, but you couldn't just take like the sand people and the Jawas as they were and put them into a snowy planet, right? So all these things have to work together. They all have to sort of make sense. And that's where it gets really tricky, especially in games, that you have to sort of make these decisions about where and how these things are. And so whether you start with character designs that are more important or level designs in the worlds is one of the first questions you kind of need to ask. And, where is this thing going to take place? So whether you're making a movie, a TV show, or a game, the whole kind of where is this thing going to take place is one of the very first questions you have to ask. Because ultimately that's going to drive a lot of your decisions about how many, about what everything else is going to look like, right? The types of characters you have, the types of things that you have, in the happening in the game are really important. And so if you mismatch those, you don't want to like create a science fiction character that suddenly now, has to be in a Wild West thing necessarily. Now that could happen. Or you get, hybrids, but you do have to kind of be aware that these things do exist. So let's see here. Couple questions. How long is a rapid iteration cycle, or is it a way of varied depending on the scenarios? It really varies. I mean, the rapid iteration cycles, if you can get in the same room, if you can get live, could be things that could take minutes, hours, days. But usually it's a back and forth. In my case, for a lot of stuff where you're taking days or weeks, because generally it depends on your skills of the people that you have with you on your team. So one of the best assets, or some of the best assets I've ever had on any team are phenomenally good illustrator, concept artists, right? And so some concept artists, in the way they draw, they need time to like go away and they draw, and they could do a drawing maybe in 4 hours or typically in a day or 2 days, whatever. And so you might have a meeting and you might say like, okay, here's kind of what I'm thinking. And even if they're just going to do black and white and quick sketches and not even color it, they still like their process is going away and taking that time and they're drawing this thing out, right? Now, I've worked with concept artists who are really amazing. And if you look at people, unfortunately, like one of the Grand Masters, Sid Mead, if you guys know who Sid Mead is, he passed away this last year. He was a friend of mine, and Sid would just literally like, as you talk to him, like even if you're just sitting here having a conversation, he always had a pen and paper in his hand, and he was just sketching like all the time. He literally his hand never stopped moving. Like he just was always sketching. And so if you were like brainstorming ideas and riffing and going back and forth, practically by the time it came out of your mouth, he already had a drawing for it. And so you could rapidly iterate so quickly because he would just be like, shh, like, you mean like this? Oh, no, like this, and then he just keep going. And you're like, an hour later you had 100 drawings and you're like, oh my God, like that was amazing. So drawing, and concept artists and people like that have a lot of skill that can help you rapidly iterate a lot faster. But whether that's writers in the room, designers in the room, things like that, having people being able to really move quickly and be able to make decisions quickly, and having decision makers in the room and those kinds of things can help the iteration process move really fast. And so sometimes it can be literally a 5 or 10 minute conversation of just like, okay, I want a desert world, I want this, I want that, and if a creative director or somebody who's like the movie director comes in and tells you that, that's all you get, and you just have to run with that, right? And so he may tell you, I want X, Y, and Z, and now it's up to you to go figure out all the details, right? And he may not tell you, I want a sand planet with banthas, with Jawas, with this and that. He may just say, I want a sand world, with a bunch of aliens. And, and now you've got to go figure out, okay, I've got a box now, I've got restrictions, and let me go figure out all the details, and I can go spend some days or weeks, working on that. Let's see here, a couple questions. No, I mean, Dennis, the level design sounds like kind of an architect job, but it's so much more in the game where you're really building the worlds, right? And you're starting. For me, I start with the worlds. I start with understanding what literally the level, the environments, the world is, the nuances of those things. Like again, is and then through there you have to bring it to life, right? And so architectural design can be part of a level designer's job or part of an artist's job. It doesn't matter. Again, both of those can kind of go back and forth, but I find the job of a level designer is very fascinating because it is very multifaceted and that you have to do a lot of different things. Hi, Jenna. No, so the courses are, we are CG Spectrum's a school, and please go check out cgspectrum.com as our school website. And and check us out. We are a paid school, and we're definitely not just like a simple thing like Houdini or some of these things where we're just charging a cheap rate for a few classes or a few hours of things. If you look at our school, our typical program is about a 20-hour-a-week class, and you're getting about 5 hours of video lecture. You're getting, with my course, you're getting an hour a week of one-on-one time with either in a classroom or just like this with video with a mentor. And and our courses are anywhere from 10 months typically for a base class to 20 months with an advanced class. So they're definitely very intensive and long and do definitely cost money, but if you check out our website, it'll give you most of the details you need on prices and stuff like that. Let's see here. Yeah, so Dennis, I've made a few games in Game Maker, and it's very, very easy exactly to ruin your game, and so that's where in my course and just in general, my advice is you really have to think through these things. You really have to plan, and so the more that you can plan on paper, the better off you're going to be. And so the fastest way to iterate is just in text, right? So and so again, unless you have really fast concept artists who can really draw super quick. Your fastest way and the best way to iterate on these things is to, again, just type it out in words. Whether you're an artist or a designer, again, getting together, doing these things in person as a team is by far 1,000 times faster than, you do something, I do something, you do something, I do something, back and forth. And so that's where, again, game development is a team effort. And very rarely do we, get to work in a vacuum. And even me, after 25 plus years experience in building these things, I know a lot. I know more than most people, honestly, in this industry, but I cannot make a game by myself, right? I cannot work in a vacuum. I still need artists to help me. Even though I have an art background, I still need artists to help me. I still need engineers to help me. I still need writers to help me, and yes, I can get some of that myself, but it's still a team effort. And so if I just go work in a vacuum and I go write and design this big thing and then hand it off to somebody to get done, they can do that, but it's never going to be as good. You are going to be much stronger as a team and much stronger working together with people. And whether that's in real time or very fast iteration back and forth, you always want to work in a team. So let's see, Dennis. I have a question. Let's say one of your students graduated from CGS Spectrum. Another student doesn't feel he can fit in the industry, yet they can take more classes, like a few more months maybe. I'm not sure exactly, your question, Dennis. I mean, typically with CG Spectrum, they're generally you're taking like a class, which is generally a 10-month class. We are working on, I think, some stuff where there may be some accelerated, like say a 6-week program or something like that. But that might focus on just a particular tool or something like that. So we are, I think, more and more working on some little smaller things that would be, again, either add-ons if you take a course and want to have some extra stuff, or if you're just, wanting to take on some smaller stuff. But as of right now, think of us as more of a real university. And we are out there, like you wouldn't go to Harvard and just say like, hey, I want to take a class for a month. Like, right? You're going to go to Harvard and you're going to go there for the year. And so we're really right now more focused like that as a big, university, but we are working more towards, having some extra stuff there. But we don't want to be a Houdini or somebody that just comes in and says, well, for 12 weeks, you're going to take this and spend, 20 minutes a week or an hour a week or whatever, and, and get a little certificate when it's done. There's lots of schools that do that. We're really focused on giving you a real career. And when you're done taking our course, you'll get a job and be successful. But we do recognize that there's always need to keep learning new skills. So it's a delicate balance, and we're doing our best to constantly generate new classes and new programs, every month, for you guys. So Ethan, how's it going? Let's see. Oh, yeah, sorry, Ethan, about that. I don't have an easy way of controlling my picture-in-picture window in OBS, so I apologize if it's overlaying things a little bit. So hopefully it's tolerable for you guys. There's not an easy way for me to move everything, so I recognize that. If it's easier, I can do this, however, and let me see if maybe I can just do that. And then, Ethan, is that a little bit better for you guys? Try to give it as full screen here as I can get it. So maybe that helps you guys a little bit, so you can see the full slide there. All right, so moving forward here. So I'm again going to kind of blow through the level design stuff, and kind of talk about things pretty quickly, just because again I don't want to get too bogged down in this. But again, the job of a level designer is really that person that's putting that world together, right? And you're typically building these worlds in some kind of an engine. It can be 2D, it can be 3D, it can be Unity and Unreal. And we won't get into this week. Maybe in a couple weeks I'll talk more about like the whole process between artists and designers, and how that sort of works. And so because this idea of like who builds what is really different, and so it's again a very similar problem to what we're talking about today, as far as does a designer build something or does an artist build something like in a game. So for example, when I'm doing the final assembly of a level, one of the questions as a level designer is, do I need to have really good art skills? Because on some teams, the very, very, very final assembly of a level and making it look really pretty is actually done by a level designer. And in some cases, a level designer roughs it out and then an artist comes back after them and then makes it look really pretty. And every team's a little bit different there. And so we can dive into that another week if you guys are interested, because again, I think, with a lot of you being artists, it's a very interesting challenge about who does what, right? Who's doing what every week is definitely a problem you have to kind of address or figure out, because again, I've seen lots of different teams do it in different ways, and there's not necessarily a perfect solution. So Mean Genie, school accredited. So right now, CG Spectrum is, we have some partners in like Australia and stuff that you can work with that are accredited. We're based out of Australia, but a lot of our staff and a lot of our people are in the U.S. We're currently working on getting accreditation in the U.S. and other regions around the world, but no, we give you a certificate, and but what we're really focused on, and what you'll find, having been in the industry a long time, like when I hire, I don't care about a degree. I don't care what school you went to. I care about your skills, and I care about your portfolio, and I care about what projects you've worked on and those kind of things. And so CG Spectrum is much more hands-on, and we really work with you to help build your portfolio and stuff out in such a way that, that you'll be able to get a job when it's all said and done. But yeah, we're not currently officially accredited, but hopefully, by next year or whatever, we'll have a lot more accreditations worldwide, and that will allow you to take like financial aid and things like that. But we unfortunately have not gotten there yet. But we are a pretty big school. We do have, I think we've had over 1,000 students now go through our school, and and we have quite a few new students every month. We do have enrollments every single month versus like per semester and whatnot. So we are growing very fast, and we are the biggest of the movie and game schools that are teaching that. So there is a lot to learn, and all of our mentors. We have over 100 mentors in our school. All of them are working professionals. All of them, in the game industry, are working on top AAA games at companies like Ubisoft and EA, Microsoft, things like that. So they're all really great people. And on the visual effects and the movie side, all of our guys have done just amazing work. So if you go to the CG Spectrum website, you'll see more about the mentors and see that like all of our guys are really legit. So, Drawn School, I want to create open world games like Grand Theft Auto and Cyberpunk. Yep. But I'll warn you, those are also the hardest, right? So, it's great to have ambition. Just make sure that you don't, get too crazy. Because again, the doing open world games, which is something I've done a lot of, those are by far and exponentially the hardest types of games to build and design. So don't underestimate, online games and how complex they are. They may seem a little simple on the surface, but they're definitely exponentially harder for a wide variety of reasons, both in game design and technology, and art and everything else. And the technology is getting easier. The open world game design and open world stuff and streaming and things like that in general is getting better, but it's definitely still very hard. So Dennis, I have a question before I go back to my project. Oh, you can't leave us. You got to stay. But thanks for joining. I do appreciate your time. So I was wondering if there was any principal uses in this field, like in animation. So any stuff to take care of. Even the colors have meaning. I'm not sure exactly. I'm sorry, I'm not understanding your question exactly. I guess in game design, yes, like even in game design, colors have meaning, right? Like, I mean, I get a little bit in my course about some of the psychology of that. I don't go into it super deep, but there is a lot of stuff and a lot of principles in game design, both in visuals and just in game design in general. There are a lot of rules where you can for example, know that like certain colors make you scared, certain colors make you a little nervous, apprehensive, things like that. We use a lot of psychology in game design, especially that there's a lot of principles there. And so in art, there's a lot of very similar stuff that you need to be aware of when we're mixing art and game design. I'll jump ahead just for a second. The kind of previous, but for example, silhouettes. When you're designing a silhouette for, let's say, a character or a building or whatever that is, you want it to be like instantly identifiable, right? And by identifiable, not only do you need it to know that silhouette is a particular person. Like I want to know, like if I see a silhouette of Darth Vader next to a silhouette of Yoda, next to a silhouette of Luke Skywalker, like I want to, with no color, with anything, right? Just pure silhouette, black and white. I want to be able to identify those three next to each other, right? But silhouettes and things like that also are another interesting thing in that silhouettes will also kind of, again, like form and function, right? And while these stereotypes are not always true, a lot of what silhouettes become kind of interesting for is that, for example, again, like scope and scale. Like if something's really big and like really strong, and you got a silhouette of something that's very like muscular, whatever, you're going to generally assume that big muscular thing is aggressive, that it's dangerous, that it's scary, and things like that. And of course, you can always flip a stereotype on its edge, and you can have something that's really big, really scary looking, and then goes, oh, I'm nice and I'm happy, and it can be a walking paradox there. But as a general rule, things that are small are less powerful. Things that are big are more powerful. Things that are really thin are very fast. Things that are big are really slow. And so when we talk about like visual design and game design and form and function, there's base rules like that are really important that you need to establish as a team, right? So whether you're working as an artist, whether you're working as a designer, you guys need to set your visual style examples to say like, okay, this is what this thing means, right? So that the players understand what's the meaning of this thing, so that when I see it, I can instantly recognize it and instantly sort of know whether that's the right thing or not. And to give you guys a real world example, so I worked on a game called Impossible Creatures, and I'm sure none of you know it, and I kind of hope none of you have played it, because I'll apologize in advance if you did, because the game sucked. And it was a project when I worked at Microsoft that I oversaw. I was the Microsoft creative director, but this was a game that was done by a company called Relic, and their secret technology for Impossible Creatures was they had some really, really, really great technology back at the time. This is, in the 1999, 2000 range when they started this project. So they had some really great technology where they could blend different creatures together. And they could, and basically you could go in there and mix together, like, you could put the head of an elephant, with the body of a whale, with the legs of, an ant, and the tail of a dinosaur, and those kinds of things to build kind of any creature that you wanted to build. And so there ended up being, initially in the game, I think when we shipped, there was maybe 100,000 combinations. Initially there was 2 million combinations. And so, but what happened is that those typical rules that you would have of something being really big, like if you had combine an ape with a whale, you'd have this ape whale thing that was big and huge, and it looked like super powerful. And so from a silhouette and from a design perspective, you'd be all like, oh, that thing's got to be really strong and really great. But then somebody else could build this like little bee thing that was like poisonous, and this like little tiny thing, you barely saw it, and it would fly around, and it would go over there and sting that whale elephant and kill it. And you're like, wait, I'm so confused. And there was no rules, right? And so the silhouettes didn't matter, the size and scale didn't matter. And so from a real-time strategy game perspective, because there was over 100,000 combinations, there was absolutely no way to know what anything was. And so this idea of rock, paper, scissors and being able to identify something visually and know if it's good or bad, if it's ranged, if it's melee, if it's strong, if it's powerful, all these things, all those rules got thrown out completely and were completely irrelevant in that game. And so ultimately the strategy devolved into, I would go in and build a big army and then launch it at your base, and I either won or lost, because I basically would use all my resources and all my stuff, and I'd launch it at the base, and if I beat you, I beat you, and if not, you would basically retaliate and kill me. you couldn't have any strategy or tactics in that game, which it was a strategy game, and it completely failed and bombed, and it was horrible. But that was a case of we used technology to drive our decision. We used technology to drive a decision that really should have been artist and designer driven, meaning that we needed to understand the importance of silhouettes and shapes and the form versus function. But because we didn't set those rules and those rules didn't exist, ultimately it completely broke the game. So while the game did come out and it did ship and it was kind of cute, it was a horrible failure, for a lot of reasons. And so that's the kind of thing that you want to try to avoid, when you're building these types of products. So let's see here. So Dennis, hopefully that answered your question, and good luck on your project. So Matea, sorry if I'm botching people's names, trying to read everything here. I'd love to know from game design perspective how truly courageous was the concept of Kojima's Death Stranding in terms of gameplay, and how much was just hype. That's a tough one. My personal opinion is that it was a pretty bad failure when it came to game design. I only played a little bit, so I'm definitely not an expert there, and I definitely can't pretend to be an expert in that game. But I felt like I will give Kojima credit for trying to innovate. He tries to do new things. He tries to be somebody that can really push the limits on things. But in the same hand, there's a point where sometimes you go too far. There's a point where stuff is a little too weird. Like the whole system with like how you could build these big backpacks and you had to like carry everything around, and then it would like affect like how you walked, and like I felt like he just took a lot of stuff too far, and so that was my personal take, was that it was kind of one of these weird hybrids that it was really hard to classify, and for the amount of time they took, the amount of budget and everything else that they did on that, it was great to see them trying to innovate. But I also, from a game designer's perspective, was kind of taken aback by some of the decisions. Felt very poor, and I felt like they weren't great decisions from a game design perspective. And so I'm not sure what the right answer there is. I felt like it could have been done better. And there's always this kind of, as a side note, there's always this kind of like evolutionary versus revolutionary, right? Like, do we as game designers evolve something, meaning take something and make it a little bit better, or do we revolutionize something and completely throw out the wheel and just completely like go crazy and do something that's super innovative, right? And you'll find in general that revolutionary products, while they might be catchy, they might get a lot of press, they might get people excited, ultimately don't have the shelf life of an evolutionary product that's kind of like a tried and true thing that's just been made better. And so I felt like in his case, he tried to be more revolutionary, and it kind of fell on his face because he tried some stuff that just didn't quite work. But in the same hand, I applaud that he took a risk. And hopefully it didn't end his career, and hopefully that people will trust him again to try to do something else that's really great. I personally have always been a big believer in trying to be innovative and trying to do new things, but it's really a delicate balance there. So hopefully that answers your question. Sorry if it's not perfect. So Mean Genie, would you suggest getting a personal loan to go to school, or wait till it's accredited and go through financial aid? Tough question. I mean, obviously, if you're really interested in this industry and stuff like that, figuring out how to come here sooner, I think is always best. You don't want to put your career and stuff on hold. And I wish I had a solid answer to say, when accreditation would happen and when financial aid would be available. So, if there was if there was a solid answer there that I could say like, yes, we're going to have accreditation and financial aid available in 3 months, I'd probably say like, wait, right? But with COVID and everything else that's been happening, just a tremendous amount of our deals, we expected to have accreditation, honestly, like 6 months ago, with some deals that we have in place. And then, everything's been slowed down. So I wish I could give you a better answer. I hope you can find a way to join us. And see how great, in all honesty, like our program is. And I'm really, really happy to have joined CG Spectrum, and I'm here to because I really believe in what we're trying to do. And I've worked with tons and tons of schools around the world, and in the past 20 years, and I've never been happy with any of their programs, and that's why I finally decided to kind of I do this on the side, so to speak. This is I teach CGS Spectrum design stuff because I really want to give back, and I really believe in kind of helping people and stuff, and all of our mentors are that way. That they all do it because they really want to help people learn, and that's just such a great thing. And they're all working professionals versus just a bunch of academics. And so I can't even tell you like how many times I've gone into these programs and you try to ask a question, and the guys, nobody knows. They're just like, well, I'm an academic, I read a book about it, and then I'm teaching the subject, and it's just like, but they've never actually made a game, or anything real and stuff. And so I think CG Spectrum to me has always been very special. So I know I'm biased, but I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe in it, and so it's a delicate balance. All right, so moving along, levels, we're not going to get, super, super deep today into like kind of how levels are built. But again, the most important thing is about, how are you going to conceptualize a level? How do you come up with the idea for a level? Again, like what are the features in that level that are there? Is it a desert planet? Does it need to have 2 suns? There's certain things that are going to affect the visuals only. So as a game designer, like if I was to say, well, I want, a desert planet, like that has a massive effect in the gameplay, right? And that could affect the gameplay more or less in a lot of different ways. But if I was to like say, well, I want a planet that has 2 suns, well, does that matter, right? I mean, it doesn't. It's not to say that it's wrong for me to suggest that it has 2 suns, but is that a visual element, or does that second sun, have a purpose? And so, like an example of this in a movie, which is also very relevant to games and has been done, and used in games, is this idea of like light and dark, right? And so if you guys have seen the movie Pitch Black with Vin Diesel, I love that movie. It had some great stuff in it. And if you remember in the movie, he got his eyes, I think they call it shined, and it allowed him to see in the dark. And he had done that, I believe, if I remember right, because he was, working in space and he often didn't have light. So he wanted to basically have night vision. And that was a bit of a foreshadow, and that allowed him to if he hadn't had that done, then he probably would have died and never made it through the movie. But just by coincidence, now he goes to a desert planet. That planet, as far as they know, has like all this light, and it's very bright, and he's got to wear his goggles, so he's having trouble seeing. But then what they don't realize is that nighttime comes, and then when night comes, all these really bad creatures come out, right? And so now that day-night cycle had a massive effect on the movie. And if you had a video game, that was that same thing where, if nighttime comes and all these really bad creatures come out, then, it's really important that from a gameplay perspective, if you had like a open world or a living world with an actual day-night cycle, and it's going like this, then that day-night cycle, and every time it's nighttime, maybe it's 5 times or 10 times more dangerous because all these creatures come out. That's a gameplay problem, right? So that's where a game designer needs to be like, okay, guys, I need to have this type of a world, and I need to have a day-night cycle in it because that's going to dramatically affect my gameplay. But you could have something where maybe I need 2 suns. So maybe that's because it's cycling like this, and it's going to double the rate of like the thing, or maybe it's going to make or an example of why 2 suns could affect gameplay. So maybe there's 2 suns up in the sky simultaneously, and by doing that, so when it's daytime, maybe it increases the temperature of that planet so hot, like you could see that in what was the movie Armageddon, I believe, when they're on the asteroid. And when they're out of the sun, like everything was okay. And I think they're drilling in the planet, they're drilling in the comet or the asteroid. And then when the sun comes and you see it coming, it starts heating up everything, right? And you see this thing coming at you. And as soon as that thing hits where they're at, everything's erupting, all the stuff, because the heat from that sun was causing all this disruption in the ice and the cold. And so there's a perfect example of where like heat could be used to cause like massive, damage and cause like a complete change in the world. And so now as a game designer, I might say, again, I want a day-night cycle. Maybe I want two suns that are together. So when it's daytime, it's going to be really, really, really bloody hot. And so as my storyline, if you're caught out in the sun during the day, you're going to start taking damage like really fast. So unless you have special armor or special equipment, you're probably going to die out in the desert, like, in minutes or hours or whatever that is. And you can't get caught out in the sun. And so that's where this give and take between like an artist and a level designer has to go in, where you guys have to work together and you have to say like, okay, well, is that thing there just to look pretty, or is that thing there to have some function, right? And how could I use something like two suns? Because two suns could be really original. I believe, I think it was Tatooine had multiple suns or whatever. And you'd look out in the distance and it was distinct. And they used that as just a way to make you feel like you were on an alien planet, and they used like some of those things just to make it feel like, hey, you're not on Earth anymore, because there was, multiple moons or there's multiple planets. And all of that is 100% authentic. So as an artist, it's up to you to make a uniquely looking world, right? And so a game designer might just say, like, I need a desert. And if that's all they've got, then you as an artist may have to come back and say like, okay, cool. I know I got a desert and it's an alien planet desert and I got nothing else. So now it's up to me to really make this the coolest looking desert that we've ever seen. And, and deserts are I'm using desert specifically because deserts are really hard to innovate on, right? Like, how do I make a desert kind of interesting? How do I make that desert look cool, or something, and so that's the kind of thing that as an artist, now it's your job to maybe have some ideas, but then you also have to work with the designers, because you may come up with some really cool ideas, and then you tell it to the designer, and the designer's like, ooh, wait a second, like, yeah, that looks cool, but that's going to break the gameplay, or that's going to like, change the gameplay, and so that is a challenge, right? So when your gameplay is being affected by the art, and so sometimes there has to be a back and forth, and also you might need to get the engineering team involved. Like, you guys, both the engineer or both the designers and the art teams might be like, hey, we got this awesome idea, and we're gonna go build this. And then the engineering team's like, whoa, wait a second, that doesn't work, right? Like, that's not going to fit in memory. That's not going to be fast enough. That's not going to look good or whatever, right? And so again, it's a team effort. And this is where at some point artists and designers work the closest together, but then at some point they still need to like throw it over the fence, as we say, like, and have an engineer like validate it and go like, can we do this? Right? Or you need to know what your own limitations are, at least through trial and error or prototyping or whatever that is, in order to be able to see if that's even realistic. So, how many game engines does an artist need to learn? That's, it's a tough question. In really, really, really rough approximation these days, roughly 30% of the games are using Unity, 30% are using Unreal, 30% are using custom proprietary engines that are specific to a particular company or team, and then roughly 10%, I would say, are using other commercial engines like Lumberyard or Crytek or other types of engines out there that are commercially available but just not as popular. And so there literally is dozens, if not hundreds, of engines on the market. Now, as an artist, where the challenge is that if you're doing certain things, these days, like 3D modeling, for example, 3D modeling might have almost the exact same model densities, textures, designs. The way you would model, say, a 3D model for Unity and Unreal could be almost exactly the same, and so the amount of learning you need to do, the delta between those two could be really close, right? And so for a lot of art, it's going to be very, 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 very similar. So the amount of learning you need to do to learn a new engine and then to learn another engine or whatever on your particular project could be very small. Now, where that is starting to deviate a little bit, and I think it'll come back together again sometime soon, probably with this next generation of engines, is specifically like in texturing. So a lot of your texturing used to be just kind of really simple, like, you have your color map, your normal map, and a bump map. Maybe a diffuse, or diffuse is your color map, and then maybe a specular map or something like that. So you might make a game object that's maybe a minimum of 1, if not 4 or 5 textures, and those are just layered on into a material, and then the game engine knows how to take that material in and turn it into a game object. And that was kind of the way it was done for a really long time, for 20 plus years. And but now, as an example, the way you create textures, especially on really advanced games, on AAA stuff and things like that, and especially in Unreal, the texturing is an art form in and of itself. And so now people are using everything from Substance Painter to like all these different tools, and they're learning, and then you have to go into like, say, the Unreal script and the Unreal texturing things. You create all these visual textures with with boxes, and you're building a lot of that stuff right there, right within Unreal itself. And you're not doing that within, say, 3D Studio Max or Maya or whatever. And then you get into things like Houdini. And we have a new Houdini course also that's really great. But Houdini is a whole nother level of layer of complication and procedural creation and things like that. And so you have both the tools problem and the games problem, right? So as a 3D modeler, you've got to learn a number of different, just as an artist in general, you have a number of different tools that you need to learn, and then you have a number of different engines. But I would say that in many cases, especially at bigger AAA companies, they've written tools and they've written stuff such that maybe 80 or 90% of the work is all the same. How you work in 3D Studio, Maya, Substance Painter, if you're doing Houdini, whatever, and then you as an artist, it just takes it to the game engine. It wouldn't matter to you whether it was in Unity, Unreal, or whatever. And then maybe certain people specialize as a tech artist to know how to like really build like the best textures or optimize the textures. So at a minimum, you definitely need to know a game engine. It just depends on, you're not going to learn a proprietary engine if you're a student or if you're, just learning. So you're either going to have to learn, you might need to learn, just one engine really, really well. And then just, if you go get a job and you don't know the other engines, then, learn as you go, right? And whenever I hire somebody, I always expect there to be a little bit of a learning curve. I don't expect people to hit the ground running on everything, but I expect that if you're a master of Unity and you're moving on to Unreal, that, in 3 to 4 weeks, you can probably learn that new engine, at least the nuances you need to do to get decent at it, and stuff. And so it doesn't hurt for you to be, I would call it familiar with like lots of different game engines and spend a little bit of time in them, but don't feel like you have to be the master of multiple engines. I think it is, my personal opinion is it's okay to be a master of one engine. And if you like super high resolution, super photorealistic, things like that, right now, to me, Unreal's the best. If you're going for more mobile and, and things like that, then Unity could be the best. So each one has its pluses and minuses of which one you should learn. So hopefully that helps you. And so I'm gonna kind of keep going through this again. This was kind of because we're kind of needing to move. Whoops, a little too fast here. Let me see here. So this was kind of what a visual designer is doing. We're talking about, there's all these different people. There's art directors, creative directors, animators, artists, UI artists, technical artists, concept artists, like all these different people again, right? And you're using, all these different tools, and these are just, a few of the tools, and there could literally be, dozens and dozens of different tools and dozens of different game engines, right? And so the visual designer is really the person who's working on, again, the artistic side of things. And that's, one of these kind of job roles that's happening. And so what I started talking about earlier is this idea of what a visual designer does versus a level artist, right? And so a visual designer may be coming up with kind of that initial thing. So a visual designer, for example, might create a building. A visual designer might create a tree. a visual designer or whatever 3D artist, 3D animator, whatever may design and come up with a particular thing, an object per se. Whereas a level artist is really the person who's gonna put the entire thing together and assemble it, into one scene, into one thing. And so there's a bit of a difference there. Whereas a visual designer is going to create the thing, and the level artist is going to create and assemble, the entirety of this thing. And so they are very different roles. But the level artist also has to work with the level designers, and as well as the visual designers have to work with the level designers. And so it's an intricate circuit of complexity there. And so, so when you're looking to start like a level design and you're working on level designs, these initial layouts are usually done by a level designer. But again, it's this catch-22 of a level designer and a level artist have to be able to kind of go back and forth, right? They have to be able to work with each other. They have to be able to support each other. And so, a level designer or a level artist may have some really great ideas. But again, you're going to be the strongest if you're working together on these things and you're trying to kind of support each other and help each other and stuff. And so, if any of you guys, work in a vacuum, that's where it starts to get, really challenging, right? And so, so again, these, when you're concepting new art, when you're concepting, new things, you really want to be able to work as fast as we can. We talked earlier about rapid iteration, right? You don't want to have to go in and build these things in actual 3D until you know that this is really what you want, what you really need, and that's one of the challenges here. And so, depending on your art team skills or your skills, if you're an artist, you want to kind of see like, okay, what is this thing going to look like? What is this thing going to be like, right? And so so it's really tricky about, how are you going to build out conceptually something? How do we draw something out kind of conceptually that's really fast, and we iterate on that over and over again, and then we get it into a game, and now we need to make it playable. And so this is the challenge that we have, in visual design and level design, is that, these things ultimately have to be fun. And so that's where this is a lot different than, say, making a movie or something else. Is designers, whether we're artists or gameplay designers, we can have the best idea in the world and something that's just going to blow somebody away. If you just look at a screenshot, if you just looked at something there and you go like, oh, that thing looks amazing. But in the end, if it's not fun, if you can't play it, that's where it becomes a challenge, right? And so that's where it gets really tricky, to do. And so when you're doing a concept called white boxing, you're going to be building out these things and kind of be testing scopes and scales and all these things. And this is an important part of the visual design process as well, because what you're doing is you're all trying to validate whether your ideas are good or bad, right? And are things to the right size? Are things that going to be the right distance away from each other? How big are things? Like, is there going to be a weenie in my level? A weenie, if you guys don't know, is a visual element. If you think about like Disneyland, if you've been to Disneyland, like Cinderella's castle, it's this really big thing that's off in the distance that tells you like, how to navigate, right? So if I get lost in Disneyland and I'm looking around, and I'm like, where am I? And then suddenly I orientate this way and I see Cinderella's castle, like I know that that's towards the center of the park. Right. And so I may get lost a little bit visually, be heading off in some direction, and then realize like that I wanted to go back to Tomorrowland, and then, I know that Tomorrowland's off that way. And in that weenie allows me to re-navigate myself, reorientate myself visually. Right. So that's a big part of these things. And so as you're continuing to progress these levels, everything is just going to keep getting better and better and better, as you keep progressing these levels. And so, but again, this is just kind of talking to you guys through some of these ideas about how you take something from, like here, from a 2D sketch to a model to sculpting it to the final version. And this is slightly off topic, but it's really important for you guys to understand, if you don't know, the process for how art is put into the game, and at what point, are you working with the design team to really understand, and this doesn't even get into like, okay, now how does it move? How does it animate? And things like that. How, what's his voice like? What's he talk like? There's so many layers even to a single character that are important. What's his AI going to ultimately be like? And so you have to be thinking, 10 steps ahead, 100 steps ahead, where, I might be doing a 2D sketch, and again, I might want a particular type of character, but then I might need to know, like, well, what weapons can he use? Does he always have one weapon? Does he have no weapons? Does he have 100 different weapons? Can he wear armor or no armor? Is he going to move really fast? And what are his abilities? What's there? And so this is where it gets really tricky, is you're trying to visually design stuff, right? And that it's hard for you to work in a vacuum, because you can come up with the best ideas and you can make something that just looks spectacular. But if it doesn't work in the game, if it's not fun in the game, then ultimately, you're going to fail. And that's where it definitely gets a little bit tricky sometimes. And so, you need to spend a lot more time kind of in this visual design steps, where you're working with a lot of silhouettes, you're working with a lot of just shapes, and you're working with a lot of stuff to really just try to understand and go back and forth between that form and function, right? How are these guys going to look? How are they recognizable? Do they have key poses even, which are important for the animators, but it's also important to understand, like, how's this guy going to look? Is he posed off like this a lot when we see them, or like how are they going to kind of look? And some of this even comes down to marketing. If you really want to think 100 steps ahead, like, you should be thinking about, like, is this thing going to make a good toy? Like, am I building a brand and a franchise? Like, is this thing going to be seen for 5 minutes, 5 hours, or the next 5 years, right? Is it going to be just in a game? Is it maybe going to be made into a movie? Is it maybe going to be made in a toy line? And so if you're not thinking ahead like that, if you're not understanding your requirements, if you're not understanding these things, not just between now artist and designer, but now even the business side and the executive side of the project, to know what are my ultimate goals like that. And so as an example, I know that I've worked on some projects where the artist came up with just some amazing characters, and they had this one that had all these little tentacles coming off of it, and it had literally like hundreds of little tentacles that came, and it looked fantastic conceptually, right? But first of all, then we showed it to the engineers, and the engineers just thought we were, on drugs, and they're like, "There's no way you're ever going to do that." In the current technology and what we had, that was impossible. But in the same hand, we knew that we wanted to make a toy line out of all of the main characters in the game, and we also realized that there's just no way that we could make, 50 little tentacles that weren't going to break, and, they were going to look good, and, and stuff, as part of that toy. Right. And so we had to be thinking about those kinds of things and be making decisions about those things. So even though the design team and the art team thought that was a great idea, it doesn't necessarily mean it's the right idea. Right. And that's where it gets tricky sometimes. And so you do have to kind of be thinking about some of those decisions and some of those things as you're looking forward, and be evaluating your designs, in that way. And then, again, slowly moving them into 3D, slowly understanding, how those things are going to look, and understanding, is this 2D, is it 3D, and kind of understanding that whole pipeline of processes is really tricky. And then again, like, how are they going to move? How are they going to animate? Is there AI, there? Is that going to work with the AI? Is it going to work with the skeletal systems? And that's where it gets hard. I gave an example, I believe it was last week or the week before, in my talk about, I had my guys design this, was supposed to be a unicorn. And I already had a horse in the game, and I just wanted them to put a unicorn thing on it. And then they went off and spent a month, and they made a Pegasus, which was like a horse with wings and all these kinds of things. And I mean, it looked spectacular and it was great. But, just from an animation standpoint, I didn't have the memory, I didn't have the time, I didn't have anything to be able to animate those wings and the mane of the horse that needed to be animated, and a whole bunch of other stuff that was there I couldn't do. And so ultimately the entire design and the month of work got thrown out, not because it was a bad idea, but it didn't work for technical reasons. It didn't work for production reasons, and things like that. And so it was a lot of wasted work, right? And that's just, boiling down to kind of bad, bad communication, right? And so, I'm not going to get again into all this, and I apologize again. We're moving kind of fast, but you have to understand what your pipelines are, right? And so, as you're moving through, these things, you need to understand again, like this ambiance and theming, and we were kind of alluding to this back with the desert planet, right? But to me, this is one of the places that you're starting with, right? Where you need to know, like, okay, is this is a rainy world? Is it a foggy world? Is it a sunny world? Is it dark and light? Or what are these nuances on the ambiance and theming of your level can be really important for you to understand and get right, very, very early in your production process. So here's a case of that's an interesting case, because sometimes these things come from technology reasons, and not just from art and design. And so if you guys are familiar with a movie and game series called Silent Hill, it was a horror, very, very popular horror game and movie. Really great game, especially back in like the original PlayStation in the early days. And the game had like really, really, really heavy fog. And what was interesting was that fog originally came because the technology of their engine and the technology they had currently back in that era was so limited that the programmers kind of required to have a very low fidelity world, because they couldn't draw that much on screen. And so the designers and the artists wanted to have higher quality, like close in, but they knew they couldn't have higher quality all the way out. They didn't have the sophistication of the game engines today and the power of these new the PS4 versus PS1, right? There's been massive exponential leaps in power. And so the programmers basically said, well, you got to make the world really foggy and therefore bring in your draw distance. And so it started as a technical limitation. However, what's interesting is they turned that into a design, what do you call it? Just like it was a bonus. It was a plus. It was something that was a benefit, right? And so ultimately the whole game kind of became about this foggy world, and it's the thing that was very signature to it was always this like super foggy place that you could barely see in front of you, kind of thing. And that made it kind of creepy. It made it scary. It helped make it a much more of a horror game. It became the signature component for these things. And so I find that very interesting, but that all came about because of a technical limitation, not because initially that the designers wanted to make the game scary. I mean, yes, it was, but in the end, this technical problem ultimately drove the art and drove the design and became this key signature for the for the game. And so but that ambiance really led a lot to why it was so unique, right? And why it made it so special. And so that was where this kind of stuff happened, especially on PS1, where again you're maybe seeing 25 yards ahead of you or something along that lines, and and the things are and were very limited, right? Now we won't really kind of get into replayability, but you have to even be thinking about in your level designs, are you in your world, like, are you going to come back here again? Are you going to revisit this thing? Like, how much time are you going to spend here? And how big does this thing need to be? And like all these kinds of questions are really tricky, because it's like that scope and scale problem. And so you as an artist, you can't just like if your designer or your creative director goes to you and says, well, I want a desert world, and that's all he says, and he goes away, where you've got to figure out, well, how big is the desert world? Like how complicated is it? Like is it a linear? Is the world and the path I'm going to take this kind of linear path, or is it a big open world and I can go anywhere on it? And especially in a desert, and I'm using it as an extreme example because it's the hardest. It's really hard to limit a player in a desert of where he's going to walk, right? So if I want the player to follow a path, like how do I do that in the desert, when technically they can go from, point A to point B and just walk across, because there's not a whole lot that's blocking you, maybe some rocks, but, it's difficult to do there. And so these are the kinds of things, these are the kinds of decisions that you as a game designer or artist have to start asking questions, right? And maybe you don't know, and maybe you have to have a meeting, maybe you have to get together, or maybe you have to brainstorm, and maybe you have other levels. Maybe you already did a desert, maybe you already did another world, so you know that, like, okay, we're doing an open world, and this particular level, it can be 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer square, and we know the rough size, we know the rough amount that it can have in it. So if you know a starting place for where to begin, that'll make things a lot easier. But sometimes you don't know that, right? And so these are the problems where you want to make it look really good, but you also need it to function really well, right? Too. And so that's one of those challenges where you have to kind of figure out, like, okay, I know visually like what this thing is going to be, but for example, we talked a minute ago about Houdini, and something really big that allows you to see and navigate something there. But like, how big is my level, and can I even see that Houdini? Will it even fit in the world? Do I have mountains over here that block me? Do I have an ocean over here that blocks me? Like, because we have these physical limitations in games about how big the world can be. And it's not that we can't technically draw bigger levels. Like, you can make, there is games out there that have, levels and worlds that are hundreds of kilometers square, right? And they're these big, huge, massive worlds. But just because we can doesn't mean we should, right? Because that may not be fun. We may not have the time and the production resources to go build out a world that's 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers, right? We may need it to be, 100 meters by 100 meters, not 100 kilometers by 100 kilometers, right? Just because that's all that's needed. And it may not be fun. Having a really big, huge, massive world does not make it, more fun or more interesting, right? And so you have to have this back and forth. You have to have these conversations to say, hey, look, I have an idea, and maybe that idea is a paragraph of text, and then the next guy does a little sketch, and then he's like, nope, and then it could go back and forth like that, right? Where designers could be writing in words or writing in flowcharts or working at really high levels. Artists could be working visually and sketching things, and some of this can be going on in parallel, and some of these could be going on, in serial, so on and so forth. So Drawn Skull, what about Battle Royale games? So in BR games, the world sizes can be big and small. A lot of that scales, the size and complexity of their worlds typically scales with how many players you have, also your movement speed. So games that give you more vehicles and things like that allow you to move farther, faster, better, and they can have a little bit bigger world. But they obviously also scale the map down over time, so that as the map, as time goes on, the map's going to get smaller and smaller, right? Because if the map was the same size in a battle royale when you start with 100 players and now you get down to 5 players and it's the exact same map, your players could be like doing this and not even know where each other is and not even know how to find each other. And so that's why they purposely like shrink the map down, right? And so so map sizes and things like that are often very much dictated by technology and by game design, if those are fun. So is that, I don't know exactly your question, Drawn Skull, but is that kind of what you're asking about? And please clarify if that was not what you were kind of thinking or wondering. And then to replayability real quick, even just about the Battle Royale games, like, again, like multiplayer type games and stuff like that are highly replayable. The maps and the worlds of those things are exponentially more difficult. So any kind of multiplayer maps at some levels come across as really easy. They come across as like, oh, well, we can just kind of slap something together. We can put a map together, and we can drop some stuff over here and spawn some weapons, and and boom, like it's done. But the reality is actually the multiplayer maps are considerably harder to make because there's so many nuances and there's so many ways. And I do teach a whole multiple classes on this in my course. We spent about 6 weeks on multiplayer design in my course, and it's a really complicated problem because, again, in any of these map designs and level designs, when things are highly replayable, especially in multiplayer where you're going to potentially play the same map hundreds or thousands of times, there's a lot of rules that you have to follow. And like, for example, I talk about in my class some examples. If you look at certain games like Fortnite, or if you look at some of the other popular like shooters that are on in the market, it's not enough to just have like one big level, because again, people get lost, right? And so Fortnite, not Fortnite, but I think it's CS:GO was the first game to kind of do this, but basically what some of the games do is, even within a level, they'll make themed areas, right? And so they will visually change the colors, the temperature of the level, temperature meaning the color temperature, the style of the buildings, and those kind of things, so that even on a map, even on a single map, the players are going to know sort of like, oh, well, okay, I'm in in this darker area right now that's looking kind of gritty and whatever. So I know I'm in the warehouse district, which puts me in this quadrant of the map. But then as I'm running down a path and I come around a corner, suddenly it brightens up, and and it's a lot bigger, and it's and it's colorful and things like that. So now, like, I know, like, oh, I'm in the arts district. So even without me having to look at a map, like, I'll just know by the style of the buildings and the colors and those kind of things, how my maps are being designed. And so these are all these other layers of problems you have to be thinking about, both as an artist and as a designer, right? These are problems that affect both teams. Like, this is about navigation. And so, like, how do I navigate in a map? How do I navigate in a world and understand the world? So it's not even just good enough to say, for example, if I'm going to build a big battle royale map, or I'm going to build a big open world map, the next Grand Theft Auto map, like, you don't want to just have the same visual style across this entire map, because players are just going to get lost, and they're going to be constantly looking at their mini map and going like, oh, wait, I'm down over here. I thought I was up here, but I thought I recognized that building from down there, but no. So they just get lost, right? And so the visual design has a lot to do with navigation. It also helps break up the interests of levels. So if players see the same thing over and over and over again, they also get bored, right? And so you're also having to think about, like, well, how long is somebody going to be here? And are they going to keep being interested in this thing for such a long period of time? And then you get into these other layers of complexity, like the production layer. So now talking really quickly about, like, schedule and talking about the production realities of how much you can make. So in a lot of games in the past, for example, if we had 20 levels, we might actually only have the time and the ability and the resources from the art team to, say, build 5 sets of assets. And so we might have, the desert world, the snowy world, the jungle world, the foresty world, and the alien world, or whatever that is, right? And then we know that we're gonna build roughly 3 levels or 4 levels with each set of art. Now, those levels can be really distinct and can be really different, can still have sub areas and sub regions, and have cities and towns and mountainous areas and things, but games don't have an unlimited budget and time for what you can build. And so ultimately, in most games and on most teams, you need to reuse things a lot. You need to have a lot of assets that get reused, or you might have, say, one building and it's the same building, but now it's got like a slightly weathered version that looks like it's been in the sun too long. You've got the version with the snow on the roof. You got the version that's, say, broken down and half destroyed because it came from the future, or it's a different version. So your production realities also ultimately will affect your decisions as well. And so this is why it's so complicated, right? The topic I'm talking about today is this bee's nest problem of like how to make something really great, but yet you gotta like be thinking, 10 or 100 steps ahead. You gotta be thinking about the production realities. You gotta be thinking about if it's fun, right? And so, does it fit with the story? Does it fit with the gameplay? Is it technically possible to even do that in the game engine, right? Does it fit the IP? Is this going to look great if I make a movie out of it or a game out, or another game out of it? So all these things are like these questions you have to keep asking yourself, and that's why game design and just game production in general is so complicated. So let's see. Dream School information. The information really helped me a lot. I've always thought that the open world games would be more fun if you made the world bigger. No, it's bigger is not always better, right? So one of the lessons, and this is a related topic, but something to understand. So I've done a number of MMORPGs. And if you don't know, MMORPGs are kind of like open world games in that they have quite often very, very, very large levels because they have to potentially support lots of players. And the problem is again, comes back to production realities. How much can we fit in memory? And how much time do we have to make assets? How much time does a level designer have to actually like place down all these assets? And then I got to script in objectives, and I got to put down enemies, and I got to do all this stuff to put all the gameplay into those levels. And so when you have this big, massive world, everything in there has to be placed. Every enemy's got to be placed. Everything's got to be spawned. Everything's got to be tested. The QA in it, everything else, has to be working right? And that's a huge challenge. And so as your levels get bigger and bigger and bigger, the complexity of them is not just in the art and the design, but it's just across the board, across the entire production. And that complicates things. As another aside, when you get in really large open worlds, the problem is in a team environment, when you're working on a team. So like if you go to Ubisoft or something, right, and you're going to go look at Far Cry 6 now and see how they're building their levels, they might have, anywhere from 20 to 50 level designers working on the game. So if you think about like one big map, one of the things is we need an ability when we're working day in and day out that we need to be able to work on something and not get screwed up by other people working on it. So in the past, we use source control systems that allow us to check in and check out stuff so that I can check it out, which basically says, everybody else stay away, it's mine, I'm working on it. And that was one of the reasons why levels were so handy when we had level design, is that, me as a level designer, me as a level artist, me or whatever, we could create a small team and say, okay, we have this level, they have that level, and we can work on this and they can work on that. And it made it really clean when it came to the production of it. Now in an open world game, the problem is like, well, how do I go in and modify something and make sure I don't step on the toes of a teammate who also needs to work on that exact same place, that exact same time, and I'm moving trees around while he's trying to set up AI that's going to have a big fight, and then suddenly I plop a tree right in the middle of his fight, and now his AI breaks, right? And so in an open world game, we have to do what's called chunking, and so we have to break apart a level into these like areas, and then usually one person can have like a chunk checked out. So they might just say like, well, I'm taking this 100 meters by 100 meters, and then I'm going to work on this. And then when I'm done with it, I'll check it in, save my changes, and then the next person can check it out and they can work on it. And so open world games, from a production standpoint, from a tool standpoint, are a lot harder to work on. And so the bigger those levels get, it gets that production problem actually amplifies really bad. And that's actually one of our hardest problems, in open world games. But back to my original point, one of the problems we have is that when you have this really big map, the reality is we just don't have the time as level designers and level artists to flesh out like an entirely big, huge, massive level. And so what you end up kind of doing is really designing out key points. So if I have a big, massive level, I can't do 100% of like custom scripted, custom gameplay across this entire thing for the entirety of it. You just don't have the time. And so what you end up doing is you choose locations. You say like, okay, there's a big fight here. There's a medium fight here. There's a big city down here. And so even though you have a big, massive world, you might only take 5, 10, 20 points around that and then connect those with roads. And so then as I'm traveling through a forest, there's like a clearing. And now in that clearing, I might have a big fight. But now I'm going to go travel through the world again, and I have another big fight. And in the middle of all that is usually randomly generated, spawned, random stuff that's just going to be there. And it's not as good, but it's just because I don't have time in the production and ultimately resources and budget to create those things. And so that's where that problem comes in. So it's a really challenging problem. And so again, things like replayability and stuff get really complicated, especially if you're trying to figure out how to make emergent gameplay and sandboxes and user generated content, all these things. It gets really tricky. But you have to remember that from a story perspective, all of us are storytellers, right? Whether you are an artist, whether you are a game designer, whether you are a writer, all of us, or a million other jobs that are kind of related to all that, right? We are all storytellers, right? And really our first and foremost job in a game, and I would argue even in a movie, are to be storytellers, right? We need to create something that's really interesting for people. We need to create something that people want to play. And so as we move through this thing, story does not need to be words. Story does not need to be dialogue. So a writer writes story, right? A writer says, hey, these two characters are talking, and these two characters have a dialogue. These two characters are going to tell a story. Or, there's a, some text that's going to pop up on screen in a game that tells a story, right? There's a dialogue tree on screen that tells a story. Like, yes, that is storytelling and story in the most traditional senses. But if you think about the old saying of a picture's worth 1,000 words, right? This is very, very, very true. And so one of the questions in game development, especially, and I would argue even in movies, is who, again, makes choices about how do we tell stories? How do we make these things really interesting so that the story that's evolving, the story that we're telling, comes through our eyes, it comes through our ears, it comes through what we read, it comes through what we, the dialogue that we're hearing. So story doesn't even have to be the dialogue of stuff. Like, as an example, let's say I have a character and I'm walking through a world and I start hearing explosions, right? Like, I don't have to see a single thing. I mean, just the fact that I start hearing gunfire and I start hearing explosions, that's telling me something, right? I'm like, oh man, there's a fight going on. There's a battle going on. Like, what's going on? What's happening? Am I in danger? That kind of thing, right? And so just even hearing audio effects could dramatically affect, your perception of the story in the world. The next scenario, I could have that same field, right? And maybe I don't hear anything, but if I walk through a field and I see an old tank there, and maybe it's alien, and maybe it's broken down and it's dusty, and and it's burned up, and and it looks like it's been there for 1,000 years. So that tells me like, ooh, something really bad happened here, right? Maybe I see a bunch of these things, and it tells me like a battle happened here 1,000 years before. Now that may not have anything to do with gameplay. That may not have to do with the game at all. But as an artist, and I say that, again, whether we're artists, designers, writers, whatever, we just made the world more interesting. We just made this world something that kind of fascinated people. We added maybe a little bit of backstory, and we did some of that without saying a single word. There was no dialogue. There's no text. There's just the visuals of this, this old rune of a tank, there that told us something was cool about this world. Next scenario, third one. I'm walking through that same field, and I see, a bunch of tanks and things that are still on fire. They're still smoking. They're still there, and like suddenly now, my spidey senses are going to go off, and I'm like, crap, if these things are still on fire, like this just happened. Like this might be an hour old. This might be 10 minutes old, whatever. But suddenly, like, now I'm like paranoid. I'm scared. I'm like, whatever, because this just happened, right? And again, not a single word of dialogue happened, but I'm telling story through visuals, and I'm telling story through design. Now, that story may not be critical to tell, but whether it's just backstory or whether it's there just to add interest, but you as artists and you as game designers and you as the writers even all have to be thinking about, how do we make this world interesting, right? How do we make this character interesting? How do we make this tell stories, right? Because stories as human beings are what inspire us. Stories are what drive us and make us interested in a brand and a franchise and things like that. Stories are, by our human nature, something that intrigue us, right? Now, scenario number 4, I get out that same battle and the tanks are on fire, and as I'm walking through, into this field, now there could be some dead soldiers, and then I'm like, oh no, like now I know that this was some bad guys, or these were some good guys, or maybe that dead soldier's a friend, right? And then like, oh my God, now my emotions really now I'm getting choked up. Like this was maybe a character I've played with for a long time in the game, and I come across, him dead, right? And now maybe if I built up the story right, maybe I'm pissed off. Maybe I can search his body and find a note, and that note tells me like where he was, or I find a map, and that gives me a clue and a hint, and I can go on and go have some revenge, right? Or I can go do something like that. So again, without saying any words, without anything, I just told more story. I gave, more, even actions and consequences for what's going on in this world. Next scenario, like to deepen it, I'm just showing you like layers, right? The next scenario, I've got that same exact scene now, but now my friend isn't dead. My friend is leaned against the tank, and he's back, and he's bleeding to death, but he's still alive, and he can talk to me. So now I can walk up, and maybe it's through VO and voice, maybe it's through text dialogue, pop-ups, or whatever, but now I can have a conversation with him, and he tells me what happened. He tells me story, and I can talk to him, and I can find out information, and I can be like, I will avenge you, brother. Your death will be for, nothing kind of thing and stuff. So now we use story, we use words, we use dialogue to deepen that scene, right? So if you think about this from a game design's perspective, from an artist's perspective, from a writer's perspective, like how much of that's needed? Like how much of that, like who decides if there's a tank there? Who decides if it's on fire? Who decides it's there? And so there has to be this back and forth where we kind of figure out things that we might need, and so initially maybe there's just an empty field, and things will build on each other. And so maybe as the level designer, they're not even thinking about a tank. They're not even thinking about their best friend. They're not even thinking about quests. They're not even thinking about any of that stuff. They just like, okay, cool. Like, let's go make this big field. And it's just going to be something that we travel through, and there's some furry rabbits that are bouncing through the field, and it's really pretty, and we enjoy it, right? And that could be all we initially thought, with our first thoughts, and we didn't get any deeper than that. But then the artist may come along and be like, hey, it's my job to make this thing feel more interesting, right? So the artist is like, oh, let's throw a tank down there, and then the designer sees that tank and goes like, oh, that's a great idea, like I can work with that, right? And now we're going to build a little battle around it. We're going to build a little fight around it. And maybe I got to fight around that tank, and I got to do something. Or maybe I even get more inspired, and maybe that tank's going to roll in, and it's fully functional, and now I have a battle, and I blow up the tank, right? Now the tank is destroyed by the player, and that whole scene was created by me, which also tells a story, right? But now, and that may happen, and now the artist, may have another idea, and they throw that in there, and now the designer's like, oh, wait, but now I can have my dead friend, and I can have this and that, and so on, and some of these things may all come together, but some of these things may come like later, like for example, maybe later on we realize we have a friend, and later on we realize through a quest that we need that friend to die, right? And now we're struggling because we're like, okay, I've got a friend, we've built up that he's my friend, I've grown attached to him, and now I need a place for him to die. And you may not know where he's going to die, but now you realize and you remember like, oh, I got that field, I got that tank, I had that whole thing going on over there. So, okay, that's a great place to now bring that that character in, and I can set up a quest there, and I can set up all that stuff around that whole scenario. And so a lot of times these things just get layered and layered and layered, but it's this interesting dilemma because you can see that there's artists and designers and, like I said, many other types of people, from audio guys to whoever, who might need to get involved in determining, what this thing really is, right? Yes, so Hideo Kojima is one of the masters of visual storytelling, and there's a lot of that. There's a lot there with Hideo that he just has some masterful layers, and so one of my jobs, and this is what I'm really good at. But again, I want all of you to be good at that. If this is whether you are just started off and you're a student, to whether you're got 100 years of experience in doing these things. The same problem exists all the time, right? The problem is, we need to build these really, 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 really complicated things, right? And one person like Hideo or one person like me can come up with a lot of ideas, but we can't come up with everything, right? I don't have the time, I don't have the resources for me to look at, every single level in the game, the entire world of the game, every quest of the game, every square inch of the game, and figure out how to deepen it, right? Figure out how to make it visually interesting, how to make it look cool, how to add gameplay in there. And so I rely on my team usually. And the bigger the game, the bigger the worlds, the bigger it is, the bigger the team is going to be, to need to fill this out. And I have to trust these guys to come up with ideas and to then keep deepening those ideas and making them better and better and better to make this world, even more interesting and more exciting, and stuff. But a lot of my job as a creative director, again, is to be the one who's inspiring and driving the teams and trying to encourage them to do what we call world building, right? And so world building, is this just this crazy problem of, again, the chicken and the egg problem. Who starts with what? And I know teams that will go off and write an entire script, kind of like a movie, and they'll go write this entire script, and they'll spend months doing that, and okay, I get it. And I understand that, you guys are writers, you want to be writers, and you really want to be movie makers, but you're game makers that are aspiring to be movie makers. And so you're going to try to prove yourself as writers and create these great stories. But again, how do you design these in a vacuum, right? You can't. You need to be working on these rapid iterations, these layers. The analogy I like to use is this thing's an onion, right? And if you think about an onion, it's got layer upon layer upon layer upon layer. And so in all of this stuff, where you start to make mistakes is if you start deep diving. If you bring out a drill and you start going into this onion, right? And you're diving through layer after layer after layer, but you're building a hole. So if your hole is your story, right? This is the size of your story. If the totality of your project is all these things, but your story is some percentage of that thing, and that story starts digging down to the center. That story starts going deeper and deeper and deeper, and you're fleshing out every second of the story. You're fleshing out every character. You're fleshing out every little nuance of this thing, and all you're doing is writing a story, and you're gonna have in your mind the best story that's ever existed, and you do that in a vacuum. You're in trouble. And I've seen teams do this over and over again where they'll spend sometimes 2 to 4 months writing up a story. And I'm like, stop. You guys are going to have to throw all that out, or you're going to have to throw out 80% of it because you don't know what's fun. What is your game? What kind of game are you making? What kind of characters do you need to make the game fun? What kinds of characters do you need to make that the gameplay exciting? What kinds of worlds are there? So as a writer, you may be coming up with a cool so writers are world builders, right? But they're not game designers and they're not artists. And so they may be in their minds, and in their words describing like this world, and they're like, and the world's coming to life, and they're writing all these details in the world, and then they're gonna basically say like, okay, now we want you to go make a game out of this, right? And this is not too dissimilar from like I've worked on a lot of movie-based games, and quite often you're handed a script, and it's like, okay, this is what you got to work with, and it's a nightmare because it's like some writer imagined a world, but they never thought about how is that visually interesting, how is that going to be fun, how is that going to be deep enough that I can make a something that was a 1 hour or 2 hour show or a movie and now I got to go make a 20-hour game out of that. Like, there's no way. Like, one last example, like I used to read a movie script every single day. I worked at a company called Brash Entertainment. We were a movie game publisher. And so my job was to read every movie script that looked halfway interesting and evaluate it to see if this was something we want to license and make a game out of. And the hard part is with some brands, some franchises, some directors, whatever, their idea cannot be changed at all. They want 100% to do exactly like the game has to be exactly like the movie. And the problem was the world they built, the universe they built was just not fun, right? And so it worked really well, like in the movie. But like I remember this one movie in particular, which never ended up getting made. But the main character literally had one gun in the movie, and it was this action movie, and they just carried around the extra gun. And so I was like, okay, like the movie had potential, but I'm like, okay, I need to give the character his pistol, his rifle, his shotgun, and we're going to make a first-person shooter, and we're going to do all these extra weapons in the game in order to flesh it out. And the movie director was like, nope, can't do it. He can only have that one gun, and it was like, come on, guys, like, I can't make a fun game, and make a 20-hour game out of your hour-and-a-half movie, with all the limitations that you had. And so he wasn't willing to compromise. So ultimately, we obviously didn't move forward with the game and didn't sign it. And that was just him not understanding the needs in world building to make things visually interesting, to make things fun, and the differences between storytelling mediums and all these kinds of things. And so world building and visual design and all this stuff is a really complicated subject. I could spend weeks talking about this literally. Or I could say even years talking about this subject. It's so deep. So we're running out of time. If anybody's got any last minute questions, please throw them at me right now. Otherwise, I want to thank you guys all again for coming and joining me and spending your valuable time with me today. I hope that this, taught you something. Sorry I was a little bit kind of all over the place because we kind of got distracted, but I still want to make sure you guys' questions get answered. So I hope that this kind of gave you some ideas about the challenges, whether you're an artist, whether you're a designer, of how you work together as a team and how you can come up with better and better and better ideas, by working together or just by, even if you're by yourself, to be thinking about the layers and the depths of complexity tied around, these really complex topics. So anyways, if nobody has any questions, again, I thank you all, and I'll let you all get back to your days. And if not, please, in the next couple minutes, if you got any last minute questions, throw them at me, and I'll be happy to type back to you and answer anything. But otherwise, everyone, take care, be safe, and wish you all the best, and have a great week. Thank you.